I am one of your intrepid hosts here, Eugene Perrier, alongside my co-host, Rania Eugene. Rania, great to be back alongside you again.
It's good to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Yep.
And when we say alongside, we're not joking. Look at this. Look at this. Ready? I'm going to do it. There's my hand because we're sitting right next to each other.
Yep, we certainly are. I don't know what else to say about that, but yes, it is good to be alongside you. Good to have you right here off to my left shoulder. And as you see, that was no movie magic. That was Rania's
It
real
wasn't
hands.
CGI. It was not CGI, you guys.
Or maybe it was. Who knows? Either way, very happy to have you here with us on the show as always. Want to remind everyone to take the time to hit the subscribe button so that you can be subscribed to all the great stuff that we have coming from Breakthrough News. And make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts about all the things you subscribe to, including dispatches from Rania Eugene, among many great offerings here from Breakthrough News. So subscribe, hit the bell, take a little time to let whoever is following you know that we are here, we are live, so that those who are following you can be following us as we move through the show. Anything else we should remind people about, Rania?
Yes, there is. You can
Okay,
also
look at that.
You can also support all of our work here at Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthroughnews and becoming a patron. And for those who are watching live, you can also support us by donating below on YouTube. And we always appreciate any donations, whether it's a one-time donation or whether you become a patron. That is what helps keep us going here and helps take our show to the next level. And then the other thing, too, is if you are watching right now, be sure to hit the like button, which Eugene already mentioned. But you got to hit the like button, guys. It helps us in the algorithm. And I'll probably mention that later to lecture our audience if they have not all liked
If there's not enough likes.
the show. Yeah, if there's not enough likes.
No,
That's
absolutely.
what I do.
Yes. And in addition to our show here today, I don't want people to forget that after our show, later this evening, 7 p.m. Eastern time, what is that, 4 p.m. on the West Coast? Either way, it's 7 p.m. Eastern time. We are going to have the world premiere of the Pendleton 2 They Stood Up documentary about the Pendleton 2, two political prisoners in Indiana, sentenced to decades, I think 82, maybe 84 to 100 and more, almost 150 years in prison for standing up to racist prison gangs of guards, like racist KKK-linked guards. These two gentlemen stood up against that brutality and that racism. They were persecuted and continue to be persecuted before. They spent decades in solitary confinement. The Pendleton 2 is how they were referred to, and we've got the documentary, The Pendleton 2, They Stood Up, at 7 p.m. Eastern tonight here on Breakthrough News. And after that, we will have a panel discussion that will take place. We'll have myself, Jared Ball from Black Power Media, who is co-sponsoring the documentary screening with us, and also those from the Defense Committee for the Pendleton 2 will also be joining us, and we will also have a very, very special guest, someone who was there when the Pendleton 2 led a number of prisoners to defend themselves against the racist brutality of guards. So we'll also be able to hear from the Pendleton 2 themselves. So a lot coming up here this evening, a lot coming up for us here on the show. We'll be talking about the TikTok ban, of course. We'll be talking about the brutal, tragic murder of Najee Seabrooks in Patterson, New Jersey by police. We'll be talking a little NFL. I know you're excited for that, Rania, but the rights...
So much to say.
Employment rights of players and the racism of owners, among other things. So we will also be discussing that, and hopefully we'll be able to turn here in just a bit, not quite yet, to Israel, where people may or may not have seen there are some ructions in the apartheid subset of society. So lots of things happening around the world that we are hopefully going to be able to hit in a big way here, Rania. There's, all sorts of news that's also been out there today, may be relevant to some of our followers. Last week and past weeks, we've talked a lot about the BRICS. Former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff was elected today as the head of the new development bank. That's the BRICS Bank. So that's,
Exciting.
Things that are, it'll be certainly interesting to see. The Disney Corporation feud with Ron DeSantis also deepening. Don't know if you saw that.
I did not.
Well, for people who don't know, there is a row, if you will, at the end of last year between DeSantis and Disney over basically the rights of Disney. So Disney had spoken out, I believe, against one of these ridiculous laws by DeSantis. He said Disney's an evil woke corporation. So they changed Disney, like, I mean, this in and of itself is pretty ridiculous, but the Disney World is basically in like one county, and Disney World controls the county. And so they like stripped their rights. So essentially that means when they would have to go and have a board appointed by DeSantis. So when they would need like a zoning variance or all these other things, it used to be the company and the corporation kind of just did whatever they wanted to do, which is its own problem. But now they would have to come like beg Ron DeSantis essentially. So it turns out that just before the old board left, they passed a covenant that strips the DeSantis board of all of its power, and it's in perpetuity. And if a court finds that in perpetuity is like not legal, then it is in force until the last living child of King Charles III, King of England, dies. So
wait, what?
I have no idea why it says that. I guess it's because it's really far in the future. Obviously, the DeSantis people are saying they're going to challenge it, but maybe more importantly also, Unite Here, the union for many hotel and amusement park workers who also are at Disney World, just signed a brand new contract with significant raises, which was also seen as kind of a shot at DeSantis there as well. But interesting showdown between DeSantis and Disney while workers at Disney are winning big wage raises. Interesting set of affairs. But Florida.
Florida. I love that. That should be just a segment called Florida.
Florida, man. I mean, everyone, look, Florida, you probably gets a bad rap, but a lot of these ridiculous individuals who come out of Florida, it's, you know what, they make it easy. They make it easy for you.
Well, the other thing that's really exciting that may take place soon is this Saudi-Syria potential rapprochement.
Yes.
Being, interestingly enough, negotiated or mediated by Russia. So if this takes place in a month or so from now, if it actually succeeds, I know I just took a huge pivot from Florida,
that's
but
okay.
It's what's on my mind.
Yeah.
If this succeeds, you're going to see a situation where China has mediated a de-escalation of tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's like a huge deal, right? These countries haven't had diplomatic relations since 2016. Now they will. And you'll have Russia mediating a similar sort of situation between Syria and Saudi Arabia after Saudi Arabia spent a lot of money funding and arming insurgents inside Syria to try to overthrow the government. That would be huge. It really speaks to how the U.S., I mean, obviously it's still a very powerful country, but it's certainly like not even involved whatsoever.
No,
in
it's
these situations.
It's a good point, and I mean, you know, the Syria. Saudi Arabia situation is also probably going to come in tandem, it looks like, with a Turkey-Syria rapprochement. Mr. Erdogan there facing elections, and so most people in Turkey want many of the Syrian refugees to return to Syria, and so it looks like he is going to bite the bullet and perhaps remove Turkish troops, facilitate the return of control of the border regions to the government of Syria, which obviously then would put the American presence there, essentially would become untenable, or very significantly likely to become untenable, so that could get close down. So I think it just speaks to the fact that America is I think you're right, sort of slipping. I forget where I saw this the other day. Maybe it was the Wall Street Journal or somewhere, but they were interviewing, you know, people close to the Saudi monarchy about this very issue, and they were using sort of business language, and they were like, well, listen, Saudi is going for you know, they're spreading around their portfolio risk. Like, they realize the U.S. is untrustworthy, breaks every deal, is obviously not interested in even allowing its closest client states to have even a modicum of elbow room to do things they want to do. So everyone is now, you know, looking for different ways to balance the sides off against each other.
And it'll be interesting to see how that at some point affects a country like Israel. Speaking of which, take it away, Eugene.
Great segue. And we want to segue into what a lot of people have probably seen, these protests that are happening in Israel over a judicial overhaul. And we are very, very honored to bring back to the show David Sheen, who is an independent, on-the-ground investigative journalist there in Israel. David, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I think maybe, well, you know, I know today the sort of pro-Netanyahu, pro-judicial overhaul people are on the streets saying they're second-class citizens, which was interesting. But, you know, this comes after this big ruction. So where are we right now in this judicial overhaul scenario here? I mean, it was being reported yesterday in America that things are now kind of slowing down. What's the scene there?
Mm-hmm. It's really frustrating because since Netanyahu is a pathological liar, he knows that all he needs to say is, "Oh, I'm backing down," and then no, everyone will just run with that headline, and then we'll just want hear what happens next, which was immediately afterwards. He just kept proceeding with the legislative, bulldozing through the legislature all these laws that he wants to pass in order to neuter the judiciary. So nothing is really changing. Everything is still proceeding. The only thing he said is, we're going to put it on pause for 1 month. And in exchange for that 1 month pause, the government has agreed to give Itamar Ben-Gvir, the head of the Kahanist party, the reformed terrorist, has agreed to give him his own private armed militia on top of the police services that he already controls. So I don't know why this is a reason for celebration. And that's why, the protests are continuing. Okay, true enough, the more conservative elements of society that participated only at the very last moment, like the unions and some of the other more, McDonald's and other elements that joined the strike at the very, very last minute. Okay, they're backing down, but the hundreds of thousands of people who have come to the streets for the last 3 months, really, they're not backing down. They're still heading out into the streets tonight and the rest of the week. There are maybe fewer people in the streets tonight just because they're trying to avoid physical clashes. Being in the same place at the same time as the right wing means that there's going to be physical confrontations because the violence will come from the side of the right wing. So people are trying to avoid actual physical fighting. We've seen in the few times that there have been the two sides on the streets at the same time that right-wingers physically attack the left-wingers or the centrists that are protesting in the street. And they're also, of course, attacking journalists as well. So the point is, the protests are proceeding because the judicial overthrow is proceeding. And it's quite scary because they're just driving the nails in. They're just ramping up. They're not backing down in any way.
David, it's interesting. I mean, I'm glad you put it in the context of like right-wingers. Basically, it's basically a fight between right-wingers and then, as you put it, centrists who maybe think that they're left-wingers, but they're not exactly. It's really a fight within Israeli Jewish society for the most part. And what's so interesting about all this is Palestinians are pretty much completely left out of the conversation. It seems as though, there's really people who are angry that now their rights in this country are going to be impacted. What's the conversation like? And of course, I'm speaking to the conversation that we're seeing in the U.S. media about this. The U.S. media is talking about, we need to fight for the soul of Israel. We can't let Israel become authoritarian. Netanyahu's bringing Israel in an authoritarian direction. Of course, while completely ignoring that we're also talking about an apartheid state that is militarily ruling over millions of Palestinians who have no rights. But what's the conversation like inside of Israel? Are Palestinians at all a part of the conversation? Are people making the point that I just made? Or is this strictly an issue between, the right and the centrists inside Israeli Jewish society specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, today is Land Day, a day that, for decades, Palestinian citizens of Israel specifically, have been protesting for their rights. But of course, for the most part, they are not participating in these protests against the judicial, overhaul or so-called overhaul. And for the sole reason that, yes, they are completely ignoring. In fact, at the very beginning of these protests, 3 months ago, there were efforts by some radical activists in the Jewish camp to introduce to the conversation the issue of Palestinians and how their rights are the ones that are most trampled upon. And of course, if the judiciary is neutered, then they will suffer even more. But of course, when anyone showed up to one of these protests with a Palestinian flag, they were beaten by the other protesters. So very quickly that stopped. Now, I've heard in recent weeks, the attacks against the few people, the scant people who come out with a Palestinian flag, those attacks have stopped. The protesters have learned to make a space for them. And okay, great, that's a very, very low bar. But the point is that they are a minority within a minority within a minority. Very, very few people at these protests are bringing up the issue of Palestinians. For the most part, it's an inter-Jewish conversation. Now, okay, people are going to most often protest for their own interests, and they do have interests here. So let's at least recognize them. The right wing is trying to neuter the judiciary for several reasons. There's, of course, several factions in the government and in society. We've got the right-wing nationalists, and they want both to help their glorious leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, and other ministers in the government who are up on corruption charges. They want to excuse them and allow them to continue. They aren't offended by the corruption, and they revere these leaders, and they want them to be able to continue. So that's one reason. Of course, they also want to eviscerate the judiciary because it sometimes prevents the worst excesses of Israel's racist laws. Of course, in almost every case for decades, the Supreme Court has, been in lockstep with the legislature and with the government, and it's permitted almost every single racist legislative initiative that has been put forth. But, in rare cases, it's sometimes sticks us something in the spoke of the wheel and prevents it from passing and sends it back to the legislature and asks the legislature to, make a few changes so that it won't be overtly obviously racist. So because of that, the right wants to be able to pass its racist laws without any impediment. It doesn't want to have to wait for a judicial process for that to happen. And so they want it full steam ahead. So that's their reason. And of course, when you go to the theocrats, the religious camp, the ultra-Orthodox parties, they have different interests. Their interest is they want to continue receiving exemptions from the Israeli army, so they don't serve. They also want to continue receiving benefits for not working, but for studying in religious seminaries. And they want there's a new package of legislation that would be kind of like an affirmative action, more like hermative action, in a sense that they, would not, for affirmative action is a form of legislation which would allow people who are historically marginalized to get jobs and to pick them for the job if they have the same qualifications as someone else for the job, that they would be the first in line. But here we're talking about hermative action, where people who are paid to not study English, not study math, not study any basic sciences or the things that you need to function in a modern society, but get the job anyway. So be completely hermitive from a hermit in society, but then get the job. And so this new legislation would force all government agencies and all public services to hire them at twice the rate that they exist in society. So these are their reasons. They want money, jobs, and army exemptions. And then, of course, there's the monarchists, the Kahanists, the ultra-racists that are both nationalist and religious. And their objective is they are trying to create, of course, they support all these other agendas of, ultra-racist laws. But in addition to all that, they are trying to institute a theocracy. They want to eviscerate the judiciary so that the secular legal system can be replaced with a religious legal system, so that the Torah and the Talmud will become the laws of the land. And that's part of the package of laws that they are proposing. So all of these things threaten the secular nationalists from the centrist parties, we can say. So they have serious interests at stake. Okay, for one, they are the largest group of taxpayers. So if the ultra-Orthodox are receiving benefits and not contributing to the Social Security, then these are the people that contribute the most to the tax base. At the same time, and they're the ones who serve in the army as well. On the other hand, they also see a great threat from the evisceration of the judiciary, because creating a theocracy would actually impair the rights of women, impair the rights of gay and lesbian people. Traditionally, it hasn't been legislation from the Knesset that has protected the rights of these disadvantaged, historically marginalized groups. It's been the judiciary that's done that. So if we now revert to a medieval, racist, sexist, homophobic set of laws from the Talmud, then that means that their rights are going to be severely impaired. So the secular nationalists are also very worried by this judiciary overhaul. And the other thing we have to say, they're also worried about the image of Israel. The Supreme Court allows Israel to say to the world, we are a democracy. Whether it, of course it isn't, we know it isn't, it's an ethnocracy. It privileges Jews over non-Jews, as we said, in a myriad of ways, but at least it allows Israel to claim that it's a democracy. Without, if the judiciary has no teeth, then Israel will not be able to claim that to the world anymore. And what's more, let's look at the signage we see. Okay, so if we go to the actual protests, the anti-government protests, we'll call them, slogan that has continually been used over and over again is Bagatz hu shachpatz. Of course, what that means in Hebrew is the Supreme Court is our bulletproof vest. So what does that mean? They're saying, because the Supreme Court exists, after we serve in the army and commit war crimes and crimes against humanity, we are still able to now go out into the rest of the world and travel to India and go to Thailand and fly to Europe and the United States and all these other countries, and we're not going to be arrested for these crimes that we committed while we were in the Israeli army, because the rest of the world, on account of Israel's judiciary, says, well, we can't try them in the International Criminal Court because we have to respect Israel's court system. It has a court system, so we can count on it to judge its own soldiers, to prosecute them if they commit war crimes. Of course, so that's why they say the Supreme Court is our bulletproof vest. And if the judiciary is neutered, then there's a good chance that Israelis who did commit war crimes while they were in the army will face punishment for them, might be indicted. Just certainly the leaders of Israel's army, there have been efforts to arrest them when they've entered some of these some countries in Europe and across the world. So that would only step up if there is a weakened judiciary in Israel. So the old elite, the secular nationalists from the centrist parties, are on the wane, and on the rise are the new elite, which is of course the right-wing nationalists and the religious and the monarchists, the Kahanists. So that's kind of the characters that play here. Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel are completely absent. Sure, there will be a very, very, very small contingent who does speak out, and that's calling for full equality from the river to the sea. Of course, there are Israeli liberals, there are Israeli socialists who are calling for these things, but they are a minority within a minority.
Well, let me ask you this before we let you go, David. I mean, the big sort of thing in the headlines over here is that there could be a civil war. I mean, a lot of very heated rhetoric. I mean, is it likely that this thing could sort of spin out of control and the existence of Israel as we know it could be at risk? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look, just a few days ago, what kind of brought this to a head and caused, this kerfuffle that said Netanyahu, on account of it, said, we'll postpone by just 1 month. That was because Israel's defense minister, from his party, who he's appointed, said, well, I don't know, maybe we need to pause, maybe we need to backtrack, maybe we need to think through these reforms. And the reason why he said that is because many people in Israeli society, have started to say, I'm not going to serve in the army anymore. Not because of the oppressive things it does to Palestinians, but because as a form of protest, as a way of rescinding my part of the social contract. If this is how you're going to treat us, and then we're not going to serve the state. And so it wasn't just one or two. It was, across the board, and there were people who serve in very high-ranking and sensitive positions, like airline pilots and intelligence services in the military. And so when you have this level of people participating in the protest and saying we're not going to show up for reserve duty, then the defense minister is the first to say, wow, I need to protect Israel's security, and I can't do that if I don't have my top soldiers. And that's why he started expressing hesitance about, ramming through this legislation. And so at that point, Netanyahu allegedly fired him. Of course, he still hasn't officially fired him, but that's kind of what set off this whole pause for 1 month. But the point is, it's he's pointing to something very, very real. Like that, as I said, the security discourse is the main discourse in Israeli society, right? That's why it's about the Supreme Court is our bulletproof vest. And so it's the same thing in the government. It's if there's a threat that there won't be a strong army, then we need to, reanalyze things. And so is there possible that we could see a civil war in Israel? It's already happening. First of all, there's already a civil war, but in the sense that Palestinians are half of the population of the country, or 51% or 52%. And so there's always a war on over 50% of the country's population. But in terms of an inter-Jewish war, yeah, we've already seen it, kind of on a slow burn, and now things are ramping up. I don't think that this government is going to back down. I think it sees this as its opportunity to ensure its rule forever. The next laws that it's going to pass will be even more racist. It's going to, make it ineligible for any Palestinian party to participate in the Knesset. At that point, it'll have a permanent victory. It will never be able to be challenged in, the so-called democratic system that only allows, Jews and the few Palestinians who remained in Israel who weren't kicked out in 1948 to have voting rights. But without the parties that represent them, it'll be an only Jewish Knesset. And at that point, the right does have a majority. Without the few liberals and centrists in Israeli society seeing Palestinians as their true allies and fighting for their real equal rights, they can't ever retake power. And so if the right doesn't get what it wants, if it isn't able to complete this judiciary, it's going to happen by force. That's the whole reason why Netanyahu is giving not only the police ministry to the Kahanist terrorist Itamar Ben-Gvir, but also giving him now his own private militia, armed militia. That means that the next round of protests, it's not going to be the police who were hesitant to break bones because they saw these people as fellow Jews, fellow Israelis, and they saw Ben-Gvir as kind of forcing his way and, kind of like sitting over their shoulder and micromanaging them. Now, in addition to the police, he's going to have his own private KKK to just willy-nilly break bones. And more to the point, the Netanyahu government in recent weeks has all been courting mafia families in Israel. What I said, I know it seems hard to believe, but it's not so odd if we look at the history of some other parts in the world where there were fascist governments in which the government courted private militias and mafia organizations in order to privatize the use of force, and if so that they could claim, oh no, it's not the government who are beating up protesters in the streets, it's independent contractors. Right. So yeah, I think that we are looking at the tip of a civil war in Israel. I don't think anyone's going to back down because this is the fight between the two elites, between the old elite and the new elite, and it won't end until someone is conquered.
Right.
Well, a lot there, and I appreciate you as always joining us here on the show, David Sheen, and helping us sort through it.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Well, Rania, as always, a lot going on in the world. We're going to just keep it rolling here. Hard pivot, but we're going to do a hard pivot. We're going to the National Football League here in the United States, and in a deeper sense, labor rights in the National Football League, an important issue, ongoing issue, and we are very honored to be joined here on the show by Chuck Modiano, justice journalist and sports writer. Chuck, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. Obviously, this Lamar Jackson situation has brought to the forefront a lot of things involving NFL employment issues. But just real quick, Chuck, for those who maybe don't follow sports, don't follow the NFL, don't know the Baltimore Ravens, give us just a little capsule view of Lamar. Who is Lamar Jackson, and why is him being traded potentially to another team become this massive issue in the world of sports?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Free Palestine, let's start right there. But also, Eugene, Lamar Jackson is an amazing player, an electric player, a former MVP, top echelon player, quarterback in the National Football League. But the National Football League, unlike Major League Baseball, unlike the NBA, does not have guaranteed contracts. That's a very important point. and the NFL prides itself on cutting people, meaning ending their career or trading them mid-contract, if that happens. Now, what Lamar Jackson, this incredible player, is doing something that only a couple of other players did. He's demanding a guaranteed contract. Kirk Cousins a few years ago was the first quarterback to receive a 3-year fully guaranteed contract for $90 million. And then that was up from 3 years to 5 years with Deshaun Watson a little bit over a year ago. And Lamar Jackson says, you know what? I want Deshaun Watson's guaranteed contract. So what is happening is, all of a sudden, the owners have done something unprecedented. When he was had the ability to be traded for or sign with other teams, many owners on the same day said are not interested in Lamar Jackson, bringing up the idea of collusion, something the NFL has done many times, most recently with Colin Kaepernick. So the issue here is a labor issue, not a football issue, but unfortunately a lot of media will have you confused about that.
You know, Chuck, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know. Eugene was making fun of me a little bit before we started recording, because I'm not going to pretend to know so much about football, or very much at all. But one thing that I think most people who have eyes can easily notice about professional football in this country is there's a huge discrepancy between what the owners look like and what the players look like. You have a lot of black players, and I mean, I think all white owners. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can you talk a little bit about that dynamic here? Because now you're talking about collusion with a bunch of mostly like billionaire white owners, and we're talking about the labor rights of, and I know a lot of Americans see like professional athletes as not like workers, right? Because they get paid a lot. But in this case, you do have people who are workers who are being colluded against by a bunch of white billionaire owners, and most of them are actually black.
That's right. And, you know, and not just white, but, you know, highly right wing, probably over 90% vote Trump. Many campaigned for Trump and had fundraisers. And that is your ownership class. And I want to push back against the common idea, particularly in the NFL, that the regular person has nothing in common with the NFL player. Because when you remove the top 10 NFL players, who are all millionaires, what happens is you're left with most of the players are on minimum wage contracts, which is about 900,000, close to 1 million. And that sounds like a lot, right? But not really, when the average career is usually 3.5 years. So you're spreading that out over a very long time. And when you think about that, these workers spend their entire life on this one profession just to make it for an average of 3.5 years. And then leave with concussions, and then leave with broken bones, and then leave with a collective bargaining agreement that does not support them, which recently kicked over 400 people off with disabilities. So when you talk to retired football players and their families who have to take care of them, you will find the deal for the majority of NFL players is not so great as people think it is. So I think we're closer to them than people realize, particularly in football. And in large part, it's because they don't have guaranteed contracts. They could get injured at any time. They could be jettisoned at any time. And many do not get the health care that they need, just the way all other Americans that's the case for. So I always say that.
You know, I think that's a good point. I mean, there's so many great points to be, I think, made here. And, you know, I mean, but even picking up a little bit on what Rania was saying about how we look at this, and I don't know, maybe this is a stretch that I'm saying this, but, you know, you look at Lamar Jackson, they're obviously trying to make an example out of him and to tell players, don't say anything. And you know, the star quarterback system in and of itself, when we talk about collective bargaining, we talk about the nature of how the NFL has managed their labor issues. I've always felt myself like, I mean, obviously this means a lot of like the star white quarterbacks you've heard of also were probably not getting the best contract they could have. And it just seems interesting to me that, you know, here we are with the rise of the black quarterback that I know you and I can remember, Chuck, when that seemed unbelievable. It just was
Yeah.
never. It was considered it couldn't happen. And now we had two just in the Super Bowl. But we have the Colin Kaepernick situation. They make an example of him. Lamar Jackson. They make an example of him. And it just seems like even the rise of the black quarterback is in and of itself indicative of not only how the sport has changed, but about how the players who are a part of it have asserted themselves, over the stereotypes that black people were too dumb to play quarterback. And now, over the fact that you couldn't, be political. And now that you deserve to be paid, what you're actually worth, probably less than that to the teams. And here they are making an example out of them. So it does feel like there's also just a racial element to the labor dynamics at that level as well. I don't know what you think about that. It's more of a comment, I guess.
There's no question about it. And you hit the point about the rise of the black quarterback. And Lamar Jackson is not someone they want to cave into. So let me just give you a little bit of background on money. He played his first 5 years making $32.5 million. Take Josh Allen, who was drafted in the same exact class. And Josh Allen got $85 million in his first 5 years. They renegotiated his contract in his third year right away to give him far more money in year 4 and year 5. So that's the same class. Case Keenum, even a lot of sports fans never heard of him. He's a backup quarterback. He's made $40 million in the last 5 years. These people made over $100 million in the last 5 years. Derek Carr, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Jimmy G, Ryan Tannehill, over $120 million. Kirk Cousins, who people know in D.C., $155 million over the last 5 years. None of these quarterbacks are on Lamar Jackson's level. So let's be clear. When Lamar Jackson is saying, give me a guaranteed contract, he's saying, give me my back pay. You had the greatest heist that you could possibly have. And now you want to talk about what I'm worth when you've had the greatest bargain in football the last 5 years? So for me, when we talk about football and we talk about contracts, have that conversation both ways. Have the conversation of how much more value did he bring? Because if you crunch the numbers, Lamar Jackson gave over $100 million back to the Ravens, and the least they can do is return the favor. But you are right, there's definitely a racial element. As we see the black quarterback rise, we see the black coaches decline. And that is for some of the similar racial reasons why Kaepernick is not on the field today. They're trying to appease a white fan base, a white right-wing fan base, and say, that's a little too much blackness to have a black quarterback and a black coach. So you've seen that happen at the same time. And it's very important to point that out.
No, I think it's a good point, and it just reminds me of the point you were making about who these owners are and what their politics are. Because of course that used to be the NBA too. We can remember how Allen Iverson was, the world's worst person for wearing long shorts, or having braids, or having tattoos, and now all the players have braids, tattoos, long shorts, whatever they want to do. And obviously the NBA is still making a lot of money. Anytime I at an NBA game see one on TV, seem to be plenty of white people there. So it almost feels like the owners have started to create this economic rationale, to back up their own racism that, of course, all the leagues used to do, but I think it's been shown by the NBA is obviously fake, and it's interesting to see. It seems to speak to who they really are as people in terms of how they've constructed this reality for quote unquote why they're not having coaches or whatever.
That's absolutely right. I think everybody here has seen the picture of Jerry Jones in 1957, the picture that was discovered, that he was in the Arkansas Little Rock crowd. And his defenders said, oh, my goodness, that's so long ago. He's such a changed man. And I'll say, well, what's your evidence of that? Because when Colin Kaepernick was protesting, he put a call out to his players to say, if anyone follows suit, you're not going to be on my team. That's what Jerry Jones did. Jerry Jones doesn't hire black head coaches, doesn't hire black offensive coordinators, doesn't hire black defensive coordinators, special teams coordinators. So we know Jerry Jones does not respect black intelligence, only if you could run fast and if you could jump high. So what is your evidence that you are so progressive since that 1957 picture? And when we look and go deeper into these owners, we don't see a lot of evidence. And finally, I want to say this. There are a lot of people to say, well, the league is 70% black. How can they possibly be racist, which is very, very ignorant. And I think this crowd understands that. But I get that a lot. Well, back in the 1870s, the majority of jockeys were black. In the Kentucky Derby, 13 of the 15 jockeys were black. This is in the 1870s. Is anyone going to make the claim that the people running those horses weren't racist in the 1870s South? Of course not. If a black athlete could make you some money. There's always going to be a white owner to extract that money. But when it's time to give back or when it's time to pursue racial justice, they're nowhere to be found.
That's 100% true. And just real quick before I let you go, Chuck, I have to ask you this. Do you want to give me a prediction on the South Carolina-Iowa women's basketball Final Four game tomorrow night at 9 p.m.?
I'm Team Dawn Staley. First of all, Caitlin Clark is an incredible player. Incredible. The hype is real. She's the real deal. But when you have a team like South Carolina that Dawn Staley has playing epic defense, I believe that is the team that is going to win and go back for back-to-back titles, taking nothing away from Caitlin Clark. But South Carolina has a better team, in my opinion.
I'm going for that 100%. You know, I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia in the 1990s, so I'm Dawn Staley all day. Shout out to Dawn Staley, South Carolina. It's going to be a great game. Check that out tomorrow. Chuck Modi, as always, really appreciate you joining us here on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, Rania.
Eugene.
I didn't really have anything to say there. Just thanks for sticking with me there. You did know a little something, see?
I did know a little something. But I just wanted to say real quick before we move on to the next guest, for those who are watching, hit the like button. The likes are always less than the people who are watching. So for those who are watching and you haven't liked, like the show. It helps
It
in the
will help
algorithm.
us in the algorithm. It's very good.
It's that moment of the show where I shame our audience for not pressing the like button.
Sometimes you got to shame people.
And also, just a reminder, you can become a patron at patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And you can also donate on YouTube. Helps keep our show going. Back to you, Eugene.
Thank you. Well, we now want to turn our attention to Patterson, New Jersey, where earlier this month of March, Najee Seabrooks was murdered by the police there in Patterson. And we are very honored to be joined here by Cohen, who's a recording artist, motivational speaker, and advocate for Najee Seabrooks. Thank you so much for being with us.
Peace and blessings, everybody. How you doing? Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you for, attaching yourself to the movement and wanting justice for Najee. A lot of individuals, they look at the situation as something they don't want to get involved in because it's a little bit above their pay grade. But, we have individuals like yourselves that are genuine with standing against police brutality and getting down to the bottom of whatever the truth is. Because that's the only way we're going to salvage his name and make sure that it's not going to go in vain of what he was accomplishing and doing while he was here.
I really appreciate that. And, one of the things that I've been seeing that is very interesting to me just in terms of the Patterson community is the impact that Najee had on so many people in just this type of situation and interrupting violence and helping bring community together. And one thing I was hoping you could talk about is what actually took place, because from what we read, it seems that, those in his community that have worked with him throughout the Patterson community were were not allowed, I should say, to de-escalate the situation. And the police are presenting it as if, we did everything we can. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Apparently to the video that they released, which was something that wasn't what we were asking. We were asking for all footage of the body cams to be released unedited, so that way we can get all forms of angles and what was the conclusion, because it's not making sense how you were there for a certain amount of time and that was the end result. So it's like, okay, could other things have been exhausted? Could other things have been presented in a manner? Were you really listening to when, the young man acts? Because he's an anti-violent intervention crisis, supervisor and counselor and mentor. So when you go and you look back at the footage that they did present, we're all in questioning, like, wait, hold up, is stuff chopped, is things edited, stuff is skipping through, skipping past. We are not seeing where the other individuals came from. We're not seeing where the other cops, arose and were called. And then looking back at the video, one of the parts where he had asked to speak to one of his mentors, and it popped up and then came back where it was as if the mentor was through the walk. And we're like, okay, how did that come about? If they managed to be able to get the mentor on the phone when he originally requested to have an escort to go to the emergency room. And this is one of the protocols because at the emergency room that he would most likely have went to, which is St. Joseph Hospital, where he is an advocate at in work in Patterson
Uasia,
Healing
give us 1
Collective.
second here. I think it seems like we were having a little trouble with the sound. Just give us one second here. We're gonna see if we can't fix that. So we're gonna. Yeah, no, of course, that's totally fine. We'll try to get her back in there. Important story, Najee Seabrooks. I know some folks couldn't hear, but tragic situation in Patterson. He was having a mental health episode, and he is a very, very well-respected violence interrupter in Patterson. Had his own organization that worked in exactly these situations where people were in need of assistance, but to try to prevent them from being killed by the police, and also to try to make sure that in the community violence did not break out and did not happen. But the police refused to allow those who worked with him on this issue to help him in that situation, and he ended up being killed, there by the police. They claim, he was, hurting himself, then he lunged at them and this, that, and the third. But the very fact that they wouldn't let his own support team really work just tells you everything you really need to know. And the Attorney General of New Jersey has now taken over the Patterson Police Department today. I don't know if that'll make any big difference, but they did it because of the pattern of just terrible things happening there. So it just gives you a sense of the context of this city of Patterson, New Jersey. Where this took place, but one of the many just super tragic but not coincidental police killings, right?
Well, I was gonna say, it's obviously Patterson, New Jersey has got a lot going on in terms of the police department, but this is such a national issue because obviously we have a police brutality issue in this country, but also the fact that police are so routinely used to deal with mental health crises too is a serious problem. Just a few weeks ago, there was I believe 7 police officers and then 3 others who work at this one hospital in Southern Virginia are being prosecuted for basically restraining this black man who was having a mental health crisis, who should not have even been taken to jail in the first place, because he was taken to jail and is now dead because they basically suffocated him because all of them, 7 police officers restrained him and sat on him. And it's so bad. It's very, very bad when they're being prosecuted by the district attorney, because obviously it takes a lot for police officers to ever be prosecuted for killing somebody. And of course, this was a black man, Southern Virginia, but it's such a routine story. It is a real problem. There's so many issues that goes into the fact that we have mental health problems in this country that aren't dealt with appropriately. It's very hard to find care. And on top of that, why is it that police are the first responders when somebody's having a mental health episode? Why is mental health something criminal? If you're having a mental health illness, something it's been criminalized, and obviously police are not equipped to deal with that. They can barely deal with basic things. All across the country, people are getting killed by police for not even committing crimes.
Right.
So
I think we have Uasia Cowan back with us here, advocate for Najee Seabrooks. Uasia, thanks so much for getting back with us here. And let me just ask you this. What are some of the things that you would like to see in the wake of this? I think there's a lot of talk about change in Patterson, with the police, of course, with the Attorney General coming in. But, specifically after the killing of Najee, what needs to change?
They need to screen the police better than what they're doing. A lot of the things that's happening is where after the COVID and us opening back up, and a lot of people not wanting to go back to work, and then looking to now replace certain officers that have retired, also due to past years of not getting justice for different cases. Najee is not the first, second, third, most likely will not be the last. However, they're not screening these rookies properly. I don't think they're going through the psychological process of seeing if they can if their mental state is in order, to make sure that they're able to even, go forth with diluting the situation, because it took too long for that to be the end result. And I feel like if they are going back to the beginning drawing board of how they are hiring, screening the officers, more likely making sure that the officers are residential individuals that are equipped to be a police officer in our town, in our community, more so local voting, self-policing, and things like that. We won't really be self-policing if it's one of our neighbors who is the officer, if it's one of our neighbors who is the attorney. They know us, they will know you. You will have that community base where it's not us versus them. And I just strongly feel like if they just get back to the drawing board, because it is going to take a long time to get rid of the rotten apples. You don't know who the rotten apples. Some people are just becoming officers just because of the title, just because what the authority represents and what they feel like they're capable of doing because they're behind a badge.
You mentioned other cases that have that came before
Yes,
this
other
one. Can you
cases
talk
in
a
the
little bit
past.
about that?
We're still waiting on justice for Jameek, Lori. We're still waiting on justice for Felix. We're still waiting on justice for Najee. This is the most narrowest case at hand where we got to witness physically, other than the videos from just going live and things like that. We got to witness, and it's not making sense. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. And just seeing that you just clipped of him, that was him turning from eating red meat to becoming a vegan. And we do a lot of community outreach programs and giving back to the kids. He shaped his life to where he can be of a platform to now bring others that was like him on, and just advocating for them. We advocate for the elders, we advocate for the youth. We notice that we are the bridgers. He realized that he was a bridge to a big, huge gap, and he was the birth of a new seed for change. That's as much as I can sum it up. And they took him away. They took him away, and we want the officers' names released, all of them, not just the 3 that they put out. We would like all footage, unedited, from each body cam that was on, because we also have where you can see that some of their body cameras were not on. It's some hidden agendas behind all of this, and we have to start with the top. And unfortunately, our mayor he's not working with us at this point. So it's kind of like, okay, we have to go for your head in order for us to get justice through them. Taking it to Trenton, Black Lives Matter is involved, also has reached Patterson as well. I, from a nonprofit organization by Faith in New Jersey, Faith in Action, Faith in Patterson, Faith in Collision. And what we do, we work with other nonprofit organizations that are fighting the same fight to develop them to become proper organizers. We can all come together like how we did for Najee and rally, not riot. Okay, because that's what they tried to say we were doing. They were already geared up, masked down. We're out there with strollers, babies, our umbrellas, things like that, gooses and hoodies, just wanting to find out what happened, because we can't go off speculations. We have to move in a manner where we have actual facts, because a lot of us are healing differently. We're grieving differently, and we are expecting different results. And everyone is not willing to talk about it in order to get it.
For those who are watching and who are horrified by the details of this case, what can they do to get involved?
Okay, you can get involved by not only going down to City Hall, but you can find our safe haven spots that are located at Jumpstart in Patterson, New Jersey on Montgomery Street. You can also find on Broadway, where Black Lives Matter Patterson is actually setting up their headquarters are set up there. You can also reach out to some of the churches like Priest Temple, Grace of God Church, where my organization, we have our meetings and our county meetings and things like that, just wanting to find how can we attack what is the most problematic thing that's happening right now, and how can we protect our youth while we do it. So the libraries in Patterson, New Jersey. You can also reach out to me if you would like to get further of these links and information on my IG and Facebook at Uasia Cowan, UASIA COWAN. And just you can email me there as well at UasiaCowan at gmail.com. Also email me there. and just get involved with like the coalitions and ceasefire, which is also gun violence prevention program. We have Street Keepers, which is gun violence prevention program. Shout out to Rashawn Dixon for holding that down and bringing the youth together for that. But our bigger issue is the fact that we're not in commune with our officers. They're running around, they're young, they're hot-headed, they're not being guided. A lot of the elders that were officers have retired, so they're not getting that ancestor structure on how you're supposed to move in your community with individuals. And everybody's mental state has gone array since the COVID happened. So to have that understanding that we must find a better way to unite other than unite in the form of someone's death to get things going and speak up and get involved. You just have to step out into the community, and City Hall is one of the first places that we all should be going, because that's where the action is happening, where we get to vote on things, we get to hear things that we are not agreeing with, and they hear us in numbers. So when we don't come out, this is why they feel like they have that power to just be like, oh, well, yeah, we're just going to put this up, do that, put that here, and they're going to be okay with it. It's just another black kid that nobody matters next tomorrow, next week, next month. It's not going to matter, because someone else is going to happen too, and we're going to be mourning that mom. We're going to be trying to get the truth on that end, and it's just a continuous fight.
Uasia Cohen, really appreciate you joining us here on the show, helping us sort through it all, and we'll look forward to keep following the struggle for justice for Najee Seabrooks and all the other victims.
Because we're still fighting.
That's right. Thank you so much. Terrible situation.
No, horrible. Absolutely horrible.
You know, but we will keep following it, keep struggling. There's been some big protests out there in Patterson. So as things move forward, you can count on us here at Breakthrough News to keep
where, did
following
you forget
it.
For a moment?
No, sorry, I got a message.
Where I was waiting, I was like, what's he going to say?
I was trying to make sure that everything was okay with our stream, all right? You never know. Thank you.
All right. Breakthrough News. Breakthrough News.
Jesus.
www. breakthroughnews.com. .org. I'm sorry. Let me try that again.
No.
Patreon.com/breakthrough-news.
We're just take a break. We're going to move to the next story here. I don't know, maybe it is the biggest story this week, certainly one that is making a lot of waves, and that is the issues around TikTok, whether or not it will be banned, the hearing with the CEO of TikTok in front of Congress, everything related to how technology and the new Cold War intersecting. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Amanda Yee, an editor for liberationnews.org and host of Radio Free Amanda. Amanda, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Well, it's an honor to have you here with us. I think a lot of people saw at least some of this hearing in front of Congress about TikTok. Obviously, a lot of people mocking it, but a very serious hearing in many ways. Capsule view, maybe, I guess my first question for you, Amanda, is what do you make of this hearing? I mean, what's the real purpose of it? I mean, obviously they weren't really getting to the root of anything real technologically.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be just racist political theater, like a McCarthyite spectacle overall. It was just 5.5 hours of CEO of TikTok, Shaoji Chu, being asked the same questions over and over again, where the Congress people kept trying to link Chu, who was born, raised, and currently lives in Singapore, to the Communist Party of China. And at one point, a congresswoman even asked Chu if he believed the Chinese government was persecuting the Uyghur population, which seemed entirely inappropriate to ask during the hearing in which he was there to talk about his app TikTok, right? So these people clearly are not concerned about data privacy as they claim. If they were, they would have been able to at least demonstrate some fundamental understanding of how social media algorithms or even basic technology worked, right? At one point during the hearing, one congressman even asked Chu if TikTok could access the home Wi-Fi, and he didn't really seem to understand how home Wi-Fi networks worked, right?
So crazy.
So obviously this is not about the alleged concerns over the Chinese government being able to access US user data through TikTok. What this is about is US capitalism and the dominance of Silicon Valley over the tech industry. The fundamental issue here is that ByteDance, a Beijing-based company, has built the most popular and most frequently downloaded app worldwide, and it boasts 150 million users in the US alone. And because of that, it's rapidly pulling all this digital advertising away from its US competitors, and its US competitors in Silicon Valley just are unable to compete. And this explains why the US is moving to either force the sale of TikTok to a US company or ban it entirely, which would drive TikTok's users to its competitors like Meta, Instagram Reels, which is also owned by Meta, Snapchat, or YouTube Shorts. Either way, Silicon Valley stands to benefit. And even if they don't end up banning TikTok, the spectacle of last week's congressional hearings and the scaremongering over this kind of Chinese surveillance was itself enough to drive up stocks for Meta. So like the sanctioning of Chinese tech giant Huawei, this is part of the US digital containment strategy of China, where it's trying to block its access to key markets like the US. The US is pressuring its allies to make moves to ban TikTok, just like they pressured them to ban Huawei. And this is a strategy which is trying to thwart China's rise within tech sector, and to make sure China remains in its place as this kind of semi-peripheral manufacturing hub for the benefit of Western capitalists. And for decades, China to the US was a source of cheap labor and super profits. And there's always been this kind of racist idea that China's place in the global supply chain was that of the world's factory, which is a producer of cheap consumer goods, but never a source of technological innovation. But now that China has managed to develop a competitive tech industry and some degree of economic sovereignty, the US is trying to eliminate what it sees as economic competition. And so what this really is a key front in the new Cold War, in which the US tech war against China is driven in large part by Silicon Valley, who just cannot compete with Chinese tech.
Yeah, it's amazing. The only way they can win in their so-called free market is to cheat. And I mean, you actually pointed out, I saw about the fact that Meta itself has been deeply involved in funding a lot of the people who were pushing this line of questioning, likely also feeding the talking points to a lot of these legislators, which isn't at all surprising because obviously TikTok isn't lobbying Congress. Facebook does, and Facebook is completely in bed with the U.S. national security state. But I think, there's this legislation. I'm not really familiar with all the details of it, but it's called the Restrict Act. That people have been talking about as being very concerning in terms of, were it to pass, what it authorizes the U.S. government to do with regard to media under the guise of, fighting the Chinese Communist Party, stealing our data through TikTok. Can you talk a little bit about the Restrict Act and why people should be concerned about this?
Mm-hmm. So there have actually been two bills introduced which would ban TikTok. The first is called the Data Act, which doesn't really seem likely to pass. And the other one is what you're talking about. It's called the Restrict Act, and it was introduced in the Senate. And it does seem to have a lot of bipartisan momentum behind it, and it does seem likely to pass. So under the Restrict Act, the Department of Commerce would identify information and communications technology products that a foreign adversary has any kind of interest in, or that poses what they consider an unacceptable risk to national security. And they classify foreign adversaries in the bill as China, of course, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, or Cuba. But there's also a clause later in the bill that allows the Department of Commerce to decide who is a foreign adversary at any time at their discretion. So that means that any other country could be designated a foreign adversary at a later time. So what this bill means is that it would ban any kind of ownership of any widely used information and communications technologies within the US market by these adversaries of the US. Now, Senator Mark Warner, who wrote and sponsored the bill, he has come out and said that this bill would only target corporations and not private individuals. But there's still a lot of concern because digital experts worry that the language around this bill, that it's so broad and so open to interpretation that it would dangerously expand the national security state. Like some of the clauses in this bill could be interpreted in such a way to go after individuals who attempt to evade or help others to evade these restrictions on foreign-owned information and communications technologies, and hit them with these really draconian penalties. And because this bill is so ambiguous, it could be interpreted to go after people who, for instance, use the Chinese app WeChat, for example. It could be interpreted to criminalize people who use a VPN, for which they could be hit with 20 years in jail or a $1 million fine. So again, the issue is not one of national security or data privacy. It's one of blocking Chinese technology from accessing the key US market. Data privacy here is instead being weaponized to take down a Chinese competitor that threatens Silicon dominance over the tech industry. Because data privacy concerns are in no way unique to TikTok, right? If politicians were really concerned about data privacy, they would actually endorse and enact privacy legislation to protect consumers and regulate the industry, which they just refuse to do. And they don't do that because Silicon Valley represents such a strong political force in Washington. Silicon Valley has spent over $70 million in lobbying in 2021 alone. So that means they've surpassed major industries like pharmaceuticals, oil, and gas sectors.
Wow.
And so the issue of TikTok for the U.S. government is not one of the Chinese government obtaining U.S. user data. The issue is that the government itself wants access to that data and cannot make ByteDance hand it over to them like they can with U.S. tech companies like Facebook. And these tech companies, they often work in tandem with agencies like the CIA or the NSA, as we know, or oftentimes they comply with the Justice Department when they're requested to release information.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, that in and of itself is an interesting question. I mean, that was certainly the TikTok CEO, sort of his main point is that, they comply with whatever laws that are out there. And so certainly the United States, could revisit its own law. I mean, that was one of the things is what they show kids. I know is one of the big topics of discussion and the difference between China and America in terms of what you can show kids, period, on the internet and how that speaks to the deeper underlying issue. And I mean, I think, TikTok obviously has offered up their own plan for how they would address the issue of data. So it felt sort of surreal watching the hearing because it was like, well, wait a second, they're actually addressing what you said, and yet somehow that's just being totally ignored for essentially clickbait, it seemed. As you're saying, it just feels like part of this broader panic reality that we're seeing these stories. I mean, the spy balloon, the issue of people buying land in different states or whatever, like South Dakota, something like that, the ban on land buying in Texas. I mean, it just seems like there's so many attempts to use different little incidents like this to create this mass panic amongst Americans that somehow they are deeply, deeply in threat from China.
Yeah, and what you raised earlier is a really interesting point in that, so there's been a lot of scaremongering around the issue of data privacy and U.S. user data in the hands of the Chinese government. But there's also been a lot of scaremongering around, TikTok as a tool of what they call CPC mind control. That TikTok is part of this cognitive warfare strategy of the Chinese government where they use the algorithm to influence Americans' emotions and ways of thinking, essentially brainwashing. And of course, this isn't like new propaganda. This is recycled propaganda from the last Cold War, in which the U.S. again accused its enemies like the Soviet Union and China of brainwashing American citizens to be, more acceptive, more able to accept communism and communist ideas. The Democratic chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, a few months ago, he accused China of controlling the algorithms that determine what you see on TikTok. And he noted that TikTok's sister app in China, which is called Douyin, how on that app, Chinese kids are seeing science and engineering videos And that app is used as an educational tool in China, whereas the content that TikTok shows its users in the US is essentially junk. And during the hearings, this was another point that kept being raised again and again. Like Kathy McMorris Rogers accused TikTok's algorithm of promoting suicide, drug use, self-harm, and eating disorders among children, while noting that China bans this type of content on Douyin. And Dan Crenshaw, while questioning the CEO of TikTok, he said that if the CPC wanted to, they could, use this U.S. user data to influence narratives and trends and create misinformation campaign, encourage self-destructive behavior among teenagers, and also purposely allow drug cartels to communicate freely in human and drug trafficking. Like that was the point that he raised. And, first of all, TikTok and Douyin, they show different kinds of videos because unlike the US, China bothers to regulate the content that children consume on social media, a move which US politicians often decry as authoritarian overreach. And once again, the issue is not of like individual apps themselves. It's one of lack of government regulation at the behest of Silicon Valley tech companies, the blame of which the US government is shifting onto the Chinese government.
Right. I mean, yeah, the idea that, the maybe the Chinese Communist Party is trying to hypnotize our children by making Addison Rae dance videos on TikTok go viral is so insane. But the other thing too here is there's already such a huge backlash. 150 million Americans apparently use TikTok. That's a huge number, right? It's such a popular app. And you're right, a lot of the stuff on TikTok is junk because like on all social media in America, it's all junk because it's all about corporate advertising, which ends up just promoting junk. But at the same time, a lot of people make money using TikTok and branding on TikTok. And obviously they don't have huge companies to be able to lobby Congress. But it does seem like if Congress really does something about this, I mean, I feel like in a place like America, you might actually see protests.
It happens.
TikTok is really popular. People spend hours on it a day. People make content for TikTok and their careers depend on it. I'm just curious your thoughts on what kind of backlash there might be because, I mean, I feel like it's like, Instagram tried to create Reels to compete with TikTok and it didn't work because TikTok is just so popular.
Right. There has been a lot of backlash. There were even protests in front of the congressional hearings last week. Yeah. And I think a lot of the social media apps, they really underestimate like the popularity of TikTok and, like how popular it is among Gen Z. Rania, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that Meta has been, fanning a lot of these allegations, the scaremongering around TikTok. And I just wanted to revisit it because it is really an important point because Meta has been a key component in this war against TikTok. Last year, the Washington Post, they ran a story where, they uncovered these internal emails where Facebook had hired a consulting firm to undermine Facebook's competition and present TikTok as a danger to American children and society. And so this consulting firm was instructed to deflect a lot of Facebook's own privacy issues on TikTok, and it was instructed to publicize stories in media about dangerous teen trends to pressure local legislators to act against TikTok. So what the firm would do was that they would contact local news outlets and get them to run stories about dangerous teen trends that had supposedly gone viral on TikTok, but actually a lot of them had originated on Facebook. They would write op-eds and letters to the editor in local newspapers posing as concerned parents about how TikTok was a danger to their children and society at large, and that they were worried about the Chinese government having access to their children's user data. So this campaign was waged to enlist media and politicians to help take down Facebook's biggest competitor. So a lot of this has been the doing of Meta, who has fanned the allegations of the supposed dangers of TikTok. That's where a lot of this scaremongering kind of originates. And also, of course, Meta is a huge company and they have a lot of money to spend on lobbying Congress. Like in 2020 alone, they spent a record $20 million lobbying Congress. And Silicon Valley overall is just like a huge political force in Congress, in a way that, ByteDance, TikTok, they do a little bit of lobbying, but they don't necessarily have nearly as much money as these Silicon Tech Valley companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and people don't want to seem associated with them because then they say, "Oh, you're just a Chinese shill outside of a handful of people." Well, Amanda, as always, really appreciate you. I should have mentioned at the outset that you have a lot of this and more on paper at liberationnews.org. TikTok on trial: the latest front in the U.S. tech war in China. By you, Amanda Yee, an editor of Liberation News, the host of the excellent Radio Free Amanda, which hopefully everyone is subscribed to and checking out. As always, we really, really are grateful to you for making some of your time, giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, Rania, it's really amazing. Shout out to Alex, by the way, who donated.
One more time.
Alex, thank you for your donation.
Just for those who didn't see the beginning, I am sitting
God.
right next to Eugene.
You are?
There's my hand. Look,
Okay,
I'm touching
they
his
got it.
computer.
Please.
That's
Okay. We've done enough. You just make it difficult for me to segue there. I'm just going to say, I think certainly we'll see what happens with this TikTok issue. The Restrict Act, it's in front of Congress. You can check it out. You can track it. There are 25 co-sponsors so far, being led by Mark Warner, chair of the House Intelligence Committee. And also, just to pick up on Amanda's point about, the big tech companies, himself someone who is worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of his role in the telecommunications industry. So, he's not a disinterested party. He's actually a part of this broader telecommunications military industrial complex.
I have a joke.
I think when you say it like that, okay, just go ahead.
It's like, I imagine Mark Warner just being like, "Get off my lawn, TikTok," like a grumpy old man.
That's not a joke. That's just a statement. You're just laughing at your own statement.
Just imagine being like, "Get off my lawn, TikTok."
I can imagine that, but that's not a joke.
That should be his next ad for Senate. He should be like, "TikTok, I'll get him off your lawn." Sorry.
Booth, please mute Rania. Please mute Rania
Don't
as we
listen
close
to
out
him.
the show here.
What are you like the U.S. Congress trying to take away my
yes,
voice?
I want to censor you, yes.
Find me on TikTok.
Anyway, that is going to do it for us here today on the show. Really appreciate everyone who was here. Don't forget that in just a couple hours, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have the premiere of the documentary The Pendleton 2, They Stood Up, about two political prisoners in Indiana who have been decades in solitary confinement for standing up to prison guards who were part of a racist KKK-linked gang. Yes, the KKK, prison guards, beating prisoners. Prisoners stood up. They, self-defended themselves. They were, in fact, persecuted. You will be able to see this documentary, and afterwards, in conjunction with Black Power Media, we will be having a panel discussion. Jared Ball will be there. The director of the film will be there. We'll have people from the committee to defend the Pendleton 2, individuals who were there at the moment that this self-defense moment took place there in Indiana State Prisons. We'll also hear from the Pendleton 2 themselves. So 7 p.m. Eastern, be right back here. Of course, that'll do it for us, the Freedom Side. Don't forget, go to patreon.com/breakthroughnews. That's patreon.com/breakthroughnews and become a patron. Yes, Rania, please.
And also, you can donate on YouTube. That's all I
Yes.
have to say. No more jokes. I'll save them for next time.
Yes. 7 p.m. Be here for the documentary. Roughly 8 o'clock, we will have the after show, which will also be here. So just stick with our YouTube channel, Breakthrough News, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We will see you a little bit later. But thanks so much for joining us on the Freedom Side, and we will see you next time.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.